What we are going to be covering tonight is something that one of my major listeners was particularly interested in. Number nine, Project HAARP, H.A.A.R.P, the Pentagon's mysterious HAARP project. Project HAARP, the military plan to alter the ionosphere, covered by Claire Zicker and Gar Smith, Earth Island Journal, Fall 94. And the LA Village View states, the ninth censored story is so bizarre, it could just as well have appeared in the tabloid Weekly World News as the environmental monthly Earth Island Journal, aside from the thorough investigative reporting, of course. According to writers Claire Zicker and Gar Smith, the High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Project, H.A.A.R.P., a joint project of the Air Force and the Navy, is the latest in a series of secret ionospheric experiments conducted by the Pentagon. Under construction at an isolated Alaskan Air Force base, HAARP's mission is to build the world's most powerful ionospheric heater, the purpose of which is uncertain. Officials stress the civilian and scientific aspects of the project, but the article reveals that the military has some other reasons for bombarding the atmosphere with electromagnetic energy. There has been no coverage of Project HAARP in the mainstream media, according to Smith. Taxpayers have already paid for the first phase of the project, but of greater importance, says Smith, is the possibility that HAARP, H-A-A-R-P, HAARP, may expose nearby human populations to health and safety hazards and potential risks to the entire planet. And we have on the phone from the No HAARP organization in Alaska, Nick Begich of No HAARP. Nick?
Hi, how are you this evening?
Oh, well, I just get disturbed whenever these guys, these devils, figure out new and bizarre ways to endanger the life of the entire planet. And here's another one that just snuck up on us, Project HAARP. What the hell is that?
Well, it was fairly well characterized by what you've read, but it is a very complex project. Here in Alaska, this technology has been explored through the University of Alaska Fairbanks Geophysical Institute, which is probably one of the leading geophysical study centers on the planet. And what they've done is they've joined with the military in gaining the funding for this HAARP program, and actually the prime sponsor or person in the Congress that was able to achieve this funding is our United States Senator Ted Stevens, who now chairs the Senate Armed Services Committee. He was able to get this project funded. In fact, he described it, perhaps in the most colorful way, he described it as something right out of Jules Verne when he described the project on the floor of the Senate back in 1990 when it was first contemplated. What it's designed to do is it's designed to create effects in the ionosphere that are controlled and manipulable by the military. This technology was based on a series of patents. Actually, there were 12 patents, with the lead patents by a gentleman by the name of Bernard Eastland. And these patents envisioned a global shield being created by energizing the ionosphere in a unique way. And these heaters are actually positioned in a number of places around the planet, but this particular heater design creates a very, very concentrated high power density in the ionosphere, which is the natural shield to keep cosmic radiation from coming into the planet, interacting with living organisms in a detrimental way. What they've designed essentially is a system that is powerful enough in its full operational constructed phase of essentially being able to block out all communications globally, whether they be land, sea, or air-based, and at the same time utilizing this energy, create a effect that propagates a wave so they can communicate and yet block everyone else's. That's one of the effects.
Would that be all radio, television, telephone, computer, modem?
Everything. What it's designed to do is, and it states it very clearly in the patents, is it's designed to replace the early experimentation of EMP, electromagnetic pulse, that thermonuclear weapons would create when they were detonated in the atmosphere. This technology essentially replaces that. It is a controllable effect that has the same effect as a thermonuclear detonation in blocking out communications. It's originally, Eastland's patents are actually based upon earlier work by Nikola Tesla, who some of your listeners may be familiar with.
All of my listeners are familiar with Tesla, or almost.
In fact, it was in the body of Eastland's patents, Tesla's work is actually cited as being foundational in conceptualizing this system. It's essentially a radio transmitter of a very, very large size. It's similar, in fact, it's similar in nature to the ones that were used in the Soviet Union back in the early 70s, where they called it the woodpecker signal. And it created a somewhat of a stir because people felt that it was being used for weather modification and manipulation, that it may be used for altering the way people think, and a number of other effects. And what's alarming, particularly in reading the Eastland patents, is the discussion of the ability of this technology to do such things as modify weather. And the way that's envisioned is it actually sends billions of watts of power up into the ionosphere that literally lift that portion up, creating a hole, and at the same time creating vertical drag and horizontal drag, which shifts weather patterns. In other words, they can create mini El Niños with this technology at the right power levels, which is particularly alarming. Not to mention it does violate international treaties regarding weather modification technologies in military applications. Another application that was not developed by Eastland, but was developed by one of the principal parties named in the contract documents with the government, are a series actually of 3 patents dealing with a power beaming technology. And this one will ring loudly for all of those that know of the Tesla technologies. And this power beaming system that was envisioned essentially would allow the military to generate power at a point where power was relatively cheap and available, beam it up to a reflector that is designed in one of these patents, and bouncing it back to the Earth, where then it's transferred back into an electrical energy so that it can be moved essentially anywhere on the planet without significant losses in terms of power output. That's a particularly interesting application of the technology, and it's one that the HAARP transmitter could be used for. Something to remember, the original company that owned this technology was actually ARCO, Atlantic Richfield Corporation, which holds some of the largest natural gas reserves in Alaska, trillions and trillions of cubic feet of natural gas. And when Eastland was originally contracted by ARCO Power Technologies, one of their subsidiaries, his project was to find a use for natural gas on the North Slope, and to bring that natural gas to market through conventional pipelines right now is pegged at about a $20 billion, that's billion with a B, $1 million project. So he was charged with the responsibility of trying to find some way to burn up that natural gas, create a market for it. And what he came up with were the base patents for the HAARP technologies.
How does the HAARP use up natural gas?
Well, in order to create the power levels that are envisioned by Tesla, it requires literally billions of watts of power. And so what was envisioned was converting the natural gas to electrical power to feed essentially a radio frequency transmitter, which is what HAARP is. It's just a huge, huge radio frequency transmitter. and then to take that power and beam it up into the ionosphere and transfer it either to other parts of the planet or create localized effects that could be used by the military. The danger in this, as a system, is they're messing around with an area of the upper atmosphere that is particularly sensitive. I mean, this is a when we have, for instance, geomagnetic storms or sunspot activity, interferes with radio broadcasts and normal communications. What they're doing here is deliberately dumping large amounts of energy into the ionosphere that can have that same effect. Some of the other effects that were more of interest to me in the research that I've done are the physiological effects of this type of energy radiations, and most particularly, one of the applications that's spoken to in the government records on HAARP is what they call earth-penetrating tomography. And the purpose of this is to locate underground facilities like nuclear facilities in other countries, for instance. And the way this would work is they would beam the energy up, create a literal plasma layer, which is just a layer of energy in the ionosphere, and then bounce another signal off of that layer of energy back down towards the Earth. What that energy the frequency of that energy would be in the range of 1 to 20 cycles per second or pulses per second. And what that particular range of frequency represents is essentially the same range of frequencies that most human thinking takes place. And so the effect on human beings, although it's not defined by the government in the specific HAARP documents, it was defined in a number of other government records that we were able to find, as well as a number of other documents that we were able to find by independent researchers. But the potential effect of that kind of energy coming back, it'll give them a tomography, an earth-penetrating tomography view of perhaps as much as the entire northern hemisphere, but at the same time it will also interfere with the brain wave patterns of human beings, among other things.
What does it do to the brain waves? Is that discussed, or has it been discovered exactly what changes are manifested in the brain waves?
Actually, it has. There's a researcher that's written quite a bit on the subject. In fact, we quote him in the book that we're getting ready to send to the presses. And the researcher is a Michael Hutchinson, who writes extensively on really brain technologies. Another researcher, or pair of researchers, Ostrander and Schroeder, who have written extensively on brain technologies in a book called Supermemory: The Revolution. In these books, what they basically explore is new technologies developed over the last 10 years that allow people to utilize machinery, basically to entrain brain frequencies within ranges that are used in this case for beneficial uses. The difference is you're in control of your hardware, so to speak. I mean, there's a lot of stuff on the market now that'll allow a person to do that. What's different here is you have a government on a hemispheric basis now with the capability of interfering with brainwave frequencies. One of the other documents that we found is a book called Low-Intensity Conflict in Modern Technology, with a foreword by Newt Gingrich from 1986. This was an Air Force document that explored the use of radio frequency radiation weapon systems for disrupting brain frequencies of individuals on the battlefield. And what HAARP has as a capability is it is a very, very large hammer in the hands of the military in terms of its ability to do exactly what they were exploring as early as 1986. And that particular document was put out by Maxwell Air Force Base, which generates policy and doctrine for the military throughout the United States.
So they'd be able to alter the brainwaves of everybody on the planet, except Newt Gingrich, of course.
Maybe his are already altered in different ways. I don't know, but I guess that is what is being asserted. Well, what this particular transmitter by itself at this stage does not have that capability. This transmitter is designed to put out 1 billion watts of power at a very high delivered power density in the upper atmosphere. But it is completed. They have completed the tests on this particular transmitter, and it is designed modularly so they can continue to add to it, making it bigger and bigger without disposing of the components. Now, the next phase is scheduled at $150 million, and it's scheduled to begin this summer. Now, the interesting part of this company, APTI, Arco Power Technologies, was bought out by a company called E-Systems. And E-Systems was recently featured on a CBS 60-minute segment that talked about this organization structure. It's a $2.1 billion a year company. 85% of its business is to the CIA, NSA, and military intelligence, and $800 million of its annual sales are considered black projects. E-Systems was just recently acquired by even a larger defense contractor, Raytheon Corporation, which is a $10.2 billion a year annual sales company and the number 52 holder of the Fortune 500. So what's happened here is a consolidation of technologies in the hands of a very, very large military contractor, basically a compilation of one of the prime contractors for national security and CIA work. And the CIA's history on mine technologies, for example, goes back quite some time, and it was pretty well researched, or at least researched at one point by a gentleman, Gordon Thomas, in a book he published called Journey into Madness, the true story of secret CIA mind control and medical abuses. And that was published back in, I believe, the middle 80s. But the technologies go back even further. There was a researcher at Yale, that Jose M.R. Delgado, M.D., who worked in electrophysiology at Yale, who did an extensive amount of work on mind control technologies that has continued even to this day, to the point of actually demonstrating technologies, wireless, which is essentially what we're asserting HAARP could be used for, if it were applied for that use, if they decided to do it.
This is KPFK Los Angeles. We are on the phone live as of April 19th, 1995, with Nick Begich of H.A.A.R.P. HAARP standing for High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project. H.A.A.R.P. The project, one of the top 10 censored stories of 1994. Now you are you're finishing up a book on this whole subject, right?
Right. It's right now we've compiled about 300 to 400 different source documents in putting this book together. And we stuck pretty much to the mainstream documents. We stuck with, we're quoting Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times, an array of military records and private correspondence between representatives of the military, just a very good, solid base of data. And the book is scheduled to come out in mid-July. We've got we're building a mailing list, essentially, to let people know when it is out, and I'd like to give that number if people want to get on that list.
Yes, please do.
It's 1-907-249-9111.
Okay, that's area code 907 for Alaska, right? 249-9111.
That's it.
And that's for information on the upcoming book. You have a title?
Yeah, actually, it's called Angels Don't Play the Harp.
Angels Don't Play the Harp, and that's by Nick Begich. Who, by the way, who is Nick Begich?
Actually, my background is I've worked for a number of years and involved in political circles up here in Alaska, but currently My research work is independent. I have a doctorate in medicine, in traditional medicine, from the Open International University for Complementary Medicines in Sri Lanka. And my work has predominantly been involved in electrophysiology and in the study of a new system, basically, of using electrical and low-intensity lasers through the acupuncture points for healing purposes, and that's my main interest. But this is a project that sort of came into my lap, and based on my background, I was able to pretty extensively research it, and a great number of people here in Alaska have contributed to building a huge database, and together, collectively, we've been able to put together a story that we think is probably the most neglected story of '94 and even before that. I mean, the articles that got this story, the number 9 slot, really cover just a very, very small portion of what we found. Those original articles were written 7-8 months ago, and since that time, a good deal more has developed in terms of data on this project. And I think that what people will find as this story unravels and as everyone becomes more familiar with it, is that it is a real sleeper. It's one that they didn't even want out there, and they masked this project extremely well. The difference is, I think, here in Alaska, it's a small place in terms of population, so that there was a good number of people communicating and talking about it, and the end result was we were able to flesh out a pretty good deal of information on the subject. And that book actually will have a foreword done by Dr. Patrick Flanagan, who some of your listeners may be familiar with. He's an inventor that's been around for quite a number of years.
Okay, well, Angels Don't Play the HAARP, which is with 2 A's, I expect. And for information on the book, which will be coming out in July or so, area code 907-249-9111. Nick, could we keep you up for a little while longer, see if anybody wants to call up on the telephone?
Absolutely.
Okay, if you want to talk on Project HAARP, then we are here at area code 818-985-KPFK. And I'm not used to working this technology. If I hang up on you, I'll call you right back.
Okay, that sounds great.
Okay, let me see. You still there?
You betcha.
Okay. Oh, phone lines are exploding. Hello, you're on the air with Nick Begich.
Hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
Okay, it was, yes, I'm very fascinated by it. I'm a physicist myself, and I've been working on Tesla's technology to set up standing Earth waves. He did that at the turn of the century. Is HAARP planning on using any of that technology of setting up standing Earth waves?
Actually, the most recent things that we found, the possibility exists. It's one of those applications that it's not easy to break down the government record, to find out that specific application. What we have found is the use of transmitters that are located in other places. There are several of these that are built. There's 7 in the Soviet Union. There's 1 in Norway. There's 1 in Greenland. There's a number of them in the United States, and this one in Alaska, which is a little bit different technology. But what they're doing is triangulating some of these transmitters onto a single point in the ionosphere, which creates a resonance effect or a magnified effect of a very, very significant size. Whether or not it sets up a standing wave, we don't have enough of the technical data to say yes, it does. But what we do know is that the power density that's delivered there with the addition of the newest HAARP technology is real significant. And to just kind of describe that visually, the transmitters that are located in other places on the planet, if you visualize the energy going up as like an ice cream cone, with the top of the cone being the ionosphere, the difference in this particular transmitter is it is just the opposite. It's like the large size of the cone is on the ground, and it focuses energy to a point. Now, the full Eastland patent is the change or the difference in power density at the ionosphere is current technology without considering Eastland, delivers about 1/1,000,000th of 1 watt per cubic centimeter at the ionosphere. The Eastland patent delivers 1 watt per cubic centimeter at the ionosphere, 1,000,000 times increase. Now, this particular HAARP transmitter is not that big, but it is many, many, many times bigger than anything else on the planet.
Is there an indication that they'd be turning a large amount of natural gas energy into some type of energy for transport to be used other places? Or is there any other possibility they might be using it for, let's say, causing a greenhouse effect in case an ice age comes?
That's been speculated. The idea of, first part of the question, the power beaming technologies, there are 3 specific patents that are now owned by Raytheon Corporation that were part of the original HAARP package, if you will, that APTI, the original company, had for power beaming, for doing exactly that, transferring power from one point on the planet to another. And the citations in those original Eastland patents tie back to those original Tesla patents that did exactly, or were intended to do exactly that.
Well, Tesla was able to actually put the power into the Earth's surface and set up standing waves in the Earth's surface and transmit it all the way around the entire planet and back at very high efficiency.
Right.
It would seem that if people got wise to that, they wouldn't want to transmit it by a HAARP system. They just want to use a Tesla system.
That's probably true. I don't think, though, that in terms of this particular application, it has a multitude of uses, and that just happens to be one of the
they're not volunteering what they're actually doing, right?
Military applications.
No, they're not. Okay, thanks for your call. Hello, you're on the air with Nick Begich of No HAARP.
Yeah, hi, Nick. A friend of mine and I have been doing research on infrasound, which is what you were talking about in terms of thought processes of the brain. And I've never heard of anything in terms of electrical pulses by themselves being able to alter the thought processes of human beings without actually having something to vibrate off of.
In what they've developed, and there's a couple of different technologies out there. I can direct your attention to a couple of references that you might find interesting. There's a book by Becker, Cross Currents, and that deals with electrical stimulation of the brain. There's
solely transmitted through the atmosphere, though?
No, but when you consider the fact that what that ELF is doing is it's actually making contact with the Earth. And in doing so, it does set up, in terms of a coherent ELF, it does set up a vibration, if you will. But another one to draw to is the work of M.R. Delgado, and he wrote a book back in 1969 called Physical Control of the Mind. And since then, he's done work in the University of Madrid, Spain, and I believe that work is obtainable, but it's a little difficult to get, but you can get it.
M.L. Delgado?
That's Dr. Jose M.R. Delgado, Delgado, M.D. And he originally did his work at University of Madrid. He went to Yale, and then he went back to University of Madrid.
All right, very good. And the apparatus that's being set up presently does not have the ability to do this, to affect brain processes? Because the research that my friend and I have done, the experimentation, was involving the vibration of the hypothalamus gland, which particularly set up between the hallucinatory centers and the vocal centers of the brain, the speech center. And the effects we got were one of a euphoric sense of goddom, sense of fear, but nothing that could be controlled. So I'm curious as to what application this could have for the military, except mass hysteria.
Are you familiar with a device called the neurophone?
No.
Okay, that's something you can probably... It'll be difficult to research. The patent goes back, the original patent, to 1958, and it was patented by Patrick Flanagan. And the neurophone was set up to transmit... let me put it this way. It bypassed the ear mechanism altogether and transmits sound directly into the brain. The person that invented it was written up in in a, let me see if I can get it. It was Life magazine, September 14th, 1962, and the article title is called "I've Got a Secret," I believe. Let me just double-check that.
Real quick, too, is there any way to get a hold of, like, the research material you've written or anything?
Everything is footnoted in the text of the book that's coming out, so everything that I'm saying you'll be able to source through either your local library or through an interlibrary loan or through a large university library.
Very good. All right, well, I'll get off the air so somebody else can chit-chat.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You bet.
The phone lines are exploding. Hello, you're on the air.
Yes, could you explain a little more about how the this generator can affect the communication lines, particularly these, I guess, direct phone lines?
Okay, what it's designed to do, essentially, is it sets up an energy field of just incredible size. What I'll draw your attention to is the original patent by Eastland, and let me get that patent number for you as I'm talking to you, and that will answer that question probably more completely than I can in a few moments on the phone. And that patent number is, actually there are three. Let me give you the first one. Is the most important one, and this will draw you into the others, is patent number 4686605.
Okay.
And you can get that from the U.S. Patent Office, or if you have a regional library that's part of, that's designated as a depository for federal records, you can get it from them. But that'll describe it very clearly and very precisely.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Thanks for calling. Hello, you're on the air with Nick Begich.
Thank you. Excellent program. I'm a amateur radio operator, so this is sort of interest to me along many reasons, that being one of them. This almost strikes me as when they were detonating the first nuclear bomb and taking bets on whether it was going to set the atmosphere on fire. It sounds like they're proceeding with a similar level of ignorance on this one.
Actually, it is the same. In fact, I'll quote out of the patent, out of another patent by Eastland. It's patent number 5038664. And on page 1 of that patent, what it says is, for example, in the late 50s and early 60s, both the United States and USSR detonated a series of nuclear devices of various yields to generate large numbers of charged particles at various altitudes. This was done in order to establish and study artificial belts of trapped electrons and ions. And these experiments established that at least some of the extraneous electrons and ions from the detonated devices will become trapped along field lines in the Earth's magnetosphere to form artificial belts which were stable for prolonged periods of time. What this essentially replaces is that kind of technology. It creates the same EMP, electromagnetic pulse, and it's that which blocks out all of those radio communications. It'll also blow the circuits on your computer and fine electronics, which is part of the weapon system's design. The base that's responsible for a lot of this work is Hanscom Air Force Base in Massachusetts, and part of their research effort is to develop hardened technologies. In other words, technologies that allow our electrical systems in highly sensitive military applications to be protected from EMP, but they've never really had the ability to test it in more than a lab environment since the atmospheric nuclear test ban treaties of the early 60s. But one of the patents held by APTI actually does deal with creating an electromagnetic pulse or an electromagnetic-sized explosion without radiation. And I'm going to try and find this patent number while I'm talking to you, and I can give it to you. It's patent number 4873928, and what it's called is nuclear-sized explosions without radiation. And this is another technology developed for the North Slope using natural gas in a certain application to create an EMP so they can test it on a wider scale.
When does this become operational? Any idea?
HAARP has just completed its test phase of its phase 1 construction, which has only 1 gigawatt of output power, of effective radiated power, as it's termed.
How much is a gigawatt?
A gigawatt.
I think it's a billion.
Right, 1 billion watts.
not a terawatt, which is a trillion. So
right. Now there's the next phase of this project is supposed to have an effective radiated power of 4.7 gigawatts, and the contract documents call for an eventual 10 gigawatts of output power, and the planning documents that we have indicate a desired level of 100 gigawatts of effective radiated power. So it's, and again, to remind listeners, this is a modularly constructed device that can be added to without losing the benefit of anything they've already constructed.
So if they wanted to knock out the world's electronics, what date would they be able to do this on?
The second phase is scheduled for completion in I believe it's early 97. And actually, if these things are networked around the planet with the others, and the others are modified, and to modify them means creating new antenna arrays that are relatively easy to construct. I mean, the longest time of construction for the current phase of this project was spent building the gravel pad over the swamp that they stuck it in. The actual building of the antenna array and the site itself was accomplished in one summer construction season in Alaska, which is about 150, 160 days. So an antenna array itself, configured with other radio transmitters, could be constructed in a relatively short period of time.
So other than having your own fiber optic link and Faraday cages around everything, what kind of hardware countermeasures can the average person take?
At this point, it's a subject that a number of independent researchers are looking at. At this point, I can't answer the question. You know, we've got some folks that are real skilled in physics and electrical engineering, looking at what can you do. You know, something that people can do regarding this project. You know, and this is we're thankful for the opportunity to be on the air in Southern California. Is it's the kind of project that people need to hit their representatives in the Congress, because they too are being misled to a great extent as to what these technologies can do and the deleterious effects that they can have on human beings and on all of us. So there are things that you can do politically. From what I understand of this station, you know, that's one of the things that you guys specialize in, is making folks aware of controversial subjects so folks can take some action.
So does your book go into those technical details at all?
It does. It does to quite an extent. It's written to be understandable to average folks, but we do state the facts as they're presented, and then break those down into understandable language. But we cite, every time we cite a fact, we also cite the source, so it can tie people who are more technically oriented right back to the primary documents we used in instructing the book. So it becomes the source guide for the HAARP technologies, because no one else has compiled the data in the way that we have and tried to explain it as clearly as we have.
And if you want to do further interviews, that number is good, the 907 number for you?
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks, Roy.
Thank you. Hello, you're on the air with Nick Begich of No HAARP.
Hello, Roy. And hello, Nick.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I had one fantastic burning question in my mind when I heard this, and that is a genealogy of who? You know, a chain of who. And Roy of Hollywood has Dave on every Wednesday night, who does an absolutely stupendous job of who in the whole chain. And I realize that there's a downside to that, so far as lawsuits and everything, but wouldn't it be just as important to name off, well, this person, and then behind that person is another person, and et cetera, et cetera? An expose of that type actually names the individuals who have the insanity behind such a thing, you understand?
Right.
And I realize that probably can't be published, but can you say anything about what your feelings are on that?
Well, you know, we've published what's in the public record, and patents are public record. The people who have patented the technologies, we name them. The contract document itself that was issued by the Navy to APTI originally, the only thing that they deleted from the document was the names of the key personnel associated with the project for APTI. And they weren't really bright about it, because what they did is they put the old yellow sticky over it, and then when they burned the Xerox copy, the high-intensity light sort of burns them through, so real faintly we could make out the names. And we actually tied 4 of the patents directly to names of individuals who are working on the HAARP project, although the government insists that none of these patents have anything to do with anything.
Well, again, Roy, maybe you can make a comment.
We'll continue to name the names. The other thing that we've been very careful about is our library that we've compiled, we've made sure has gone out to a number of different folks, different researchers that work independently, so that basically it's out there and it's going to stay in circulation, and the names are going to be named, and the people are going to be named, and the companies are going to be named, because this is a matter that every one of us should be concerned about.
Exactly. Well, what concerns me is the actual individual whose mind works in such an insane manner.
Well, I think part of it is, a lot of it's like, I think a lot of it with the inventors might even be, you might have to say, is somewhat innocent, at least for some of them.
Right.
Because they're specialists. They're just seeing a little narrow view of a very, big puzzle. And the way the military works, they compartmentalize everything. There's the need to know, phrase that you see everywhere in military applications. So, a lot of these folks are working in an area that, they're doing their little part, but they don't see the big picture, and they don't see the threatening nature of it.
That's what would be interesting, that as you've indicated, there's groups of people.
Right.
And behind that, there are other groups of people, and maybe you get back to the NSA, maybe you get back to where ultimately are these the major decisions being made by exactly which individuals. That would be curious.
That's difficult to hit.
I know.
Once you get past
but wouldn't that be
level,
interesting?
It gets real cloudy.
Really,
real
isn't it?
Murky to try and figure out who the real players are.
Boy.
We've pieced together a lot of data, and we've compiled, we've seen a lot of things in the literature dealing with mind control technologies as an example.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's like you see the same rehashing of the same data over and over and over again in the various medium.
Mm-hmm.
What we've done is we've taken it one step deeper into that mess, and in doing so, we've brought in a lot of new information that has never anywhere I've seen in research been compiled in the same way. And I consider myself more or less a generalist. I know a lot about little bits of science, and then my specialty is physiology in terms of my interest area. But it's an unusual mix, and the folks that have been involved in this research and compiling the data all come from just a very, very diverse set of backgrounds, which has really contributed to the effort. It's periodically, whenever I have written articles on this subject, I've written 2, I've published my address, and from that, little bits show up, and then from those, you kind of start pulling the thread of the sweater, and before you know it, half of it's unraveled.
Well, it'd be interesting if the chapter ever could be published on who is behind who.
Well, we go to a certain extent, and hopefully as people read it, we'll get feedback, and we'll be able to get more information out as time goes on. But at some point, we got to the point where we said, okay, we've got to get this stuff out there and let people know what's happening, because we keep getting information. The latest information I got that went into the text of the book was April 3rd. So, it's...
Exactly. So you'll have to publish a second book, right?
Well, what we'll probably do is just continue to revise it, and as we build, a network of folks, we'll continue to try and get information out. We think it's an important subject and one that shouldn't be neglected.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks
Okay.
for your call. Hello, you're on the air with Nick Begich.
Good evening.
Hello.
Well, to the degree that you pretty much outlined your comprehensive methods for gathering the data in the book, well, then I presume you must know quite a bit about how to answer the following. Point 1, the following references have been made in numerous places, but this particular one that I'm reading from was a letter written by some people that are doing some similar research, namely a department, shall I call it, or subgroup under the banner, the Association of the National Security Alumni electronic surveillance project, the alumni being all former CIA operatives, some of which have represented themselves on Roy's show previously. Well, they have a research project specifically about electronic mind control, but they also branched off into basically your subject. And what they have done is they have correlated to it, which I imagine you, and if you don't have this in the book, you better hold the presses until you do, namely the construction of a series of other transmitter antennas under the Ground Wave Emergency Network Project, the Gwen Towers, right?
We are familiar with that.
Right, okay, well, then what you ought to do is you ought to contact, if you haven't, are familiar with the Association of National Security Alumni?
I do have some of their materials in my data files, yes.
Yeah, okay, and their person in charge of that is a woman named Julian McKinney, and she is a victim of electronic mind control and formerly was with the DOD, where subsequently she became subjected to that. She has a whole book on her own, and I met a friend of hers recently. Are you working with Walter Bauer by any chance?
I don't recognize the name, but it's a big pile of data.
Right. Well, we'll have to bring you into connection with him. And what these national security people did was they wrote a letter on November 9th, 1993, because apparently at that time, unless this guy got voted out of office, there was a congressman, namely James L. Oberstar, member of Congress, who at the congressional level actually is opposing the Gwen Towers specifically. So people should be, I don't know if he's still in office, but if he is, I guess he's one of the people you can name that's knowledgeable plus in opposition to that side of the overall thing. What do you have to say about the Gwen project?
You know, I've read a number of references that, that essentially assert what you're saying. The difficulty is it becomes a book in and of itself. I mean, if someone were to chase down that project, amount to maybe 30, 40 pages, which is not a great deal, that project, as I understand it, could perhaps have the same kind of application, but I just don't have enough information to say definitively yes. And what we've really tried to do with the work that we've compiled is keep the subject narrow enough and yet clean enough so that it'll stand the test of being beaten up and batted around by anyone who wants to review the material. And we've, without getting really solid and good hard data, we've stayed away from a number of subjects, but we feel like dealing with these 12 patents in this particular application really is broad enough for one publication. The Gwen system, we have seen a number of references. Yes, it could have that application, but even if it weren't used for mind control, the real issue is, will it affect human physiology in a negative way, or can it? And the answer to that is yes.
Well, I commend you on your objectivity in response to the Gwen Wise question about who knows what and what they know, et cetera, et cetera. I think the first thing people should avoid at all costs is jumping the gun to blame every name that comes up as if they're all part of some weird nefarious thing, that they all know exactly every single facet of all about the whole project, or who conceived it, or why they're doing it. And to some degree, for all you know or we know, there might actually be some type of legitimate use for it.
Absolutely.
Which some of them are only knowledgeable about.
Anyone that reviews the patents can see certain applications that maybe make sense. The risks here are so great that and the independent review does not exist. I mean, nowhere in this mix directly involved in this particular project do we see people representing the life sciences and being independent of universities that depend on military money for their sustenance, and the military whose mission is a noble mission, but at the same time, their mission is narrowly focused, and the expense of a certain number of people or the risks sometimes are not perhaps measured in the same way you or I might measure those risks.
Okay,
and I
thanks.
think that's the missing ingredient here is good, solid, independent review that are in a position to know. And more than that, when projects are buried, when they're this technical, where no one's going to just go out and build one of these, and there's so much secrecy surrounding it, that's an issue. I mean, that's an issue in a free society that we all have to question, is at what point the secrecy issues and national security issues start to tread on our right to think freely, for instance, our most fundamental right in this society. And this is perhaps the most scary application or potential effect of this particular technology.
Hello, you're on the air with Nick Begich of No HAARP.
Yes, the first thing I want to say is hi, Dan in Eagle Rock. I know you're listening. And my question is basically, how could this have any possible military value if you just go out and scramble the brains of, say, half a hemisphere? I mean, all the CIA agents themselves and the secret ones in the fields would all be scrambled. And if you can't discriminate between your side and their side, what's the value?
Yeah, it's you raise a good point in terms of that particular application, and I can't really answer if they've developed the technologies that are necessary so they can protect themselves. I would assume that if they're going to deploy it, that they've developed those technologies, and I think that's a fairly safe assumption. They're in terms of being able to block an incoming wave of energy. I think that technology is out there. And can be applied in in the form of protections for individuals. But there are other military applications that we haven't even touched on, and I'll just touch on one of those that I think is it's off the subject of mind control, but it tells very clearly why this might be an important application from a military perspective. And the patent number that I'm citing is 4817495. And that patent references Eastland's original patent, and the name of this patent is Defense System for Discriminating Between Objects in Space. And what this particular patent does is is used for discriminating if you have a threat cloud, which is what they call an incoming cloud of decoys and nuclear devices, and they envision if there was ever an exchange of in a nuclear war that there would be as many as 100,000 objects coming at us, most of which, the vast majority of which, would be essentially dummies or decoys or harmless. What this technology can do is it can create a field of energy around each of those objects that then create a unique signature that will allow them to discriminate between which ones carry nuclear warheads and what are simply decoys. And when you think about 100,000 incoming objects and the computing power necessary to discriminate every one of those objects and then triangulate and get a clear shot at them, that's a pretty awesome task. But this system is designed to not only distinguish, but at the right power levels create a pulse that essentially knocks everything out. But at a lower energy level, an energy level that's reachable within the second phase of HAARP, it could distinguish which objects carry a nuclear warhead and be able to target those specific incoming objects and knock them out. So in that application, there's a very clear military mission that would be expressed in that particular patent that's owned, originally assigned to APTI, the contractor on HAARP. And let me say something about that. The contractor, APTI, what's important to note here is this company has never made a net profit. Up until the time it was sold, it never made a net profit. The only thing it had was 12 patents and a government contract. And the original Phase 1 construction of HAARP was $25 million. Phase 2 was budgeted at $150 million. And the company only had annual sales reported, and I could give you the source. I don't have it right in front of me, but it was reported in the in a directory of corporations, and under ARCO subsidiaries, it was reported that it had $5 million in annual sales. So you had a $5 million in annual sales company winning a $25 million contract, no history of ever making a dime, and only being around since 1986. Real bizarre.
Well, I'm sure with that profit and loss statement, Newt Gingrich will want to shut it down right away. I would like to thank Nick Begich of No HAARP, H.A.A.R.P., referring to the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project, a joint project of the Air Force and Navy. Project HAARP, one of the top 10 censored stories of 1994. And one more time, Nick, your book comes out in July 95, approximately.
Right.
Angels Don't Play the HAARP, with
right.
2 A's. And if people want to be on the list to receive that book, or contact No Harp. Your phone number in Alaska, 1-907-249-9111.
That's it.
It's 1-907-249-9111. And the book will be Angels Don't Play the Harp. Well, I express profound gratitude for the important work you're doing on this depressing censored story, and we hope we can help bring things around with, as the CIA says over its door, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make ye mind control. No, free.
Hey, I want to thank you all for having me on, and hello to Southern California, and I know your weather's a whole lot better than ours right now.
Okay, thanks, Nick.
Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Nick Begich of No Harp, H.A.A.R.P., area code 1-907-249-9111, or you can write No Harp, P.O. Box 916, Homer, 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 Alaska 99603. One of the top censored stories of 1994, The Mysterious Project HAARP.